Chapter 4 Ulam Halfa, Rommel's Last Attempt. On August 30, a cacophony of engine noise broke the silence of the desert night. It came from the massed vehicles of the Panzer Army Africa, which included more than 500 tanks. At 10 p.m., in bright moonlight, the lead tanks surged eastward to begin what was hoped would be the complete encirclement of the 8th Army positions around El Alamein. In the early morning of August 31, the word 12 bore was flashed around to the formations of 8th Army, indicating an attack was imminent. The expected big party was on, a New Zealand war diary recorded. Rommel's last German-Italian offensive in Egypt was underway, and it soon ran into problems even he could not resolve. Surprisingly, for someone with such a strong belief in his own destiny, Rommel was not confident of success. There were several reasons for this. First, he was as exhausted as his men, and he was also ill. A signal sent to Berlin by Rommel's chief of staff and his principal medical advisor wrote, "Field Marshal Rommel suffering from chronic stomach and intestinal catarrh, nasal diphtheria, and considerable circulation trouble. He is not in a fit condition to command the forthcoming offensive." He had become so sick that prior to renewing the offensive, Rommel requested that the only commander he thought up to the task, General Heinz Guderian, should be sent out to command it. When Rommel received the short reply from Berlin that Guderian unacceptable, Rommel felt compelled to remain and see it through. Then, Rommel had recently lost his best sources of intelligence. No longer was he in receipt of the little fellers from Cairo, nor had he been able to replace his wireless intercept unit, which had been captured by the Australians on Tel El Isa. This left him blind as to his enemy's strengths and plans. Most seriously of all, though, Rommel was well aware of the perilous logistical situation his army faced, especially its inadequate reserves of fuel. As Christopher Pugsley has written, the Battle of Ulam Halfa, the designation assigned to this 6-day offensive, was a desperate gamble conducted on a logistical shoestring with fuel supplies dependent on ships yet to arrive. Being stranded so long in the desert at the gates of Egypt had created a quartermaster's nightmare. It had proved difficult to keep this army supplied with its daily requirements, let alone build up a stockpile for an offensive. And in August, a third of Rommel's supplies and 41% of his fuel was destroyed en route to North Africa. Rommel's letter to his wife on the eve of this renewed offensive reflected the logistical weakness of his army, and, for the first time, doubts whether his offensive would succeed. Rommel wrote, "Today has dawned at last. It's been such a long wait, worrying all the time whether I should get everything I needed together to enable me to take the brakes off again. Many of my worries have been by no means satisfactorily settled, and we have some very grave shortages. But I've taken the risk, for it will be a long time before we get such favorable conditions of moonlight, relative strength, etc. again. I, for my part, will do my utmost to contribute to success. As for my health, I'm feeling quite on top of my form. There are such big things at stake. If our blow succeeds, it might go some way towards deciding the whole course of the war. If it fails, at least I hope to give the enemy a pretty thorough beating. Neurath has seen the Führer, who sent me his best wishes. He is fully aware of my anxieties." In relation to his health, Rommel was lying and attempting to reassure a worried spouse. He was a long way from feeling on top of my form. Rommel's medical advisor, Professor Horster, saw Rommel leave his quarters on the morning of the attack with a very troubled face. Rommel approached Horster and spoke to him. "Professor," he said, "the decision to attack today is the hardest I have ever taken. Either the army in Russia succeeds in getting through to Grozny, and we in Africa manage to reach the Suez Canal, or—" he made a gesture of defeat. Given the state of his health, his lack of military intelligence, and the logistical shortcomings of Panzer Army, it is little wonder that Rommel lacked his usual optimism and drive in this last throw of the dice. But Rommel knew time was not on his side. A senior German staff officer recalled, "It was clear to Rommel that time was working against him, and that as soon as the enemy had brought forward sufficient reinforcements, he would launch a powerful counteroffensive." To counter this, Rommel strengthened his own defenses, making particular use of mine gardens. But his best form of defense was to attack first. As soon as the supply situation permitted, Rommel intended making another effort from the other end of the line to break through to Alexandria. At the end of August, taking the gamble that enough fuel would arrive to sustain it, Rommel launched what would be his last offensive in Egypt. Rommel planned to make a powerful thrust against the southern portion of the Alamein position, using the bulk of his armored formations. Here, he believed, only small British forces lay in the southern part of the front. Our reconnaissance has consistently reported that only weakly defenses existed in the south, which would be comparatively easy to penetrate. These positions were to be taken in a night attack by the German and Italian infantry, and the enemy thrown back by armored formations following immediately behind. Once sufficient depth to this eastward thrust had been made, somewhere between 25 to 30 miles, the armored formations were to wheel north to the coast, and then continue east into the British rear areas. Such a deep penetration of their defenses would either send the British forces rearward in panic, or force them to give battle in the open. Rommel's armor and mobile forces would encircle and destroy 8th Army in a repeat of Gazala. He expected a clear-cut decision in the first 2 days, and warned that the decisive battle was on no account to become static. Reinforcements had recently landed in theater by Ju-52 transport aircraft. While lacking vital equipment, the arrival of the German 164th Division, the Italian Folgore Parachute Division, and the German Ramkeep Parachute Brigade had given Panzer Army some reason for optimism. The War Diary of the Africa Corps recorded on the night of August 30, "After a pause of about 3 weeks, Africa Corps once more advanced to the attack. During this time, the strength of the Corps had considerably increased. Morale was good and confident. The panzer regiments had a total of 237 runners. The infantry regiments, which had had heavy casualties, were not yet up to full strength again.